On a night when the rain fell in steady sheets, tapping a relentless rhythm against the windows, the world outside seemed to fade away, swallowed by the darkness and the storm. Inside, the house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of old wood and the distant rumble of thunder. It was the kind of night that made the familiar seem strange, and the safe feel just a little bit less certain. The first story begins with Emma, a college student who had returned home for the weekend. Her parents were away visiting relatives, leaving her alone in the house she'd grown up in. She didn't mind the solitude, at least, not at first. She curled up on the couch with a book, the soft glow of a lamp casting warm light across the living room. Outside, the rain intensified, battering the roof and blurring the world beyond the windows. Hours passed. The book grew heavier in her hands, her eyelids drooping. She was just about to drift off when she heard it, a faint tapping, different from the rain. She sat up, listening. The tapping came again, this time a little louder, a little more insistent. It sounded like it was coming from the back door. Emma's heart picked up its pace. She tried to tell herself it was just a branch, blown by the wind, but the sound was too rhythmic, too deliberate. She stood, creeping toward the kitchen. The tapping stopped. She waited, breath held, and then 3 sharp knocks, echoing through the empty house. She peered through the window, but the darkness was absolute. She couldn't see a thing. Her phone was in her hand before she realized it, her thumb hovering over the call button. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the knocking ceased. Silence returned, broken only by the storm. She stayed awake the rest of the night, lights blazing in every room. When morning finally came, she found muddy footprints on the back porch, leading away into the woods. The second story takes us to a small town, where a man named David lived in a modest house at the edge of a sprawling forest. He was used to being alone. His job required odd hours, and he often found himself returning late at night. One evening, as rain lashed the windows and wind howled through the trees, David settled in for a quiet night. He made himself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the storm. As midnight approached, a strange sensation crept over him, a feeling of being watched. He shook it off, blaming the storm for his nerves. But then, he noticed something odd. A light flickering in the woods, far beyond the reach of any street lamp or neighbor's porch. Curiosity got the better of him. He grabbed a flashlight and stepped onto the porch, the cold rain soaking him instantly. The light in the woods bobbed and weaved as if someone were moving through the trees. David called out, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. He took a few steps toward the forest, but the light vanished. He waited, shivering, but it did not return. When he went back inside, he found his front door ajar, though he was certain he'd closed it behind him. Nothing was missing, but that night, David dreamed of shadowy figures moving through the rain, their faces hidden, their intentions unknown. The third story belongs to Lily, a teenager who was babysitting her younger brother while their parents attended a late-night event. The rain had started just after sunset, and by midnight, it was a full-blown thunderstorm. The house was old, with long hallways and creaky floors. Every sound seemed amplified by the storm. Lily tucked her brother into bed and settled in the living room, scrolling through her phone. The power flickered, then went out, plunging the house into darkness. She fumbled for a flashlight, her heart racing. The only sounds were the rain and her own breathing. Suddenly, she heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, deliberate, and far too heavy to be her brother's. She called his name, but there was no answer. Gathering her courage, she climbed the stairs, flashlight trembling in her hand. The hallway was empty, the doors all closed. She opened her brother's door. He was fast asleep, undisturbed. As she turned to leave, she caught a glimpse of something in the hallway mirror. A pale face, watching her from the shadows. She spun around, but there was nothing there. She spent the rest of the night huddled in her brother's room, listening to the storm rage outside. The fourth story is about Mark, who had just moved into a new apartment. It was his first night alone, and the rain had started as soon as he unpacked the last box. The building was old, with thin walls and strange noises. He tried to ignore the creaks and groans, telling himself it was just the building settling. But as the night wore on, the noises grew louder. He heard footsteps in the hallway, though he knew all the other apartments were empty. He heard whispering voices, too faint to make out the words. He tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he felt a presence in the room, a cold, heavy weight pressing down on him. At dawn, he found a message scrawled on his bathroom mirror. "You're not alone." The words faded as he watched, leaving him to wonder if he'd imagined it, or if something in the apartment was trying to send him a warning. The final story takes place in a remote farmhouse, where an elderly woman named Mrs. Wilkins lived alone. She was used to the solitude, but on stormy nights, the house seemed to come alive with strange sounds. One night, as rain hammered the windows and wind rattled the doors, she heard a voice calling her name. A voice she hadn't heard in years. It was her late husband's voice, soft and pleading. She followed the sound through the darkened house, her heart pounding. The voice led her to the attic, a place she hadn't visited in decades. There, among the dust and cobwebs, she found an old photograph of her husband, tucked inside a forgotten box. As she picked up the photo, the voice faded, replaced by a sense of peace. She realized that even in the darkest, loneliest nights, the ones we've loved are never truly gone. And so, as the storm raged on, each of these souls faced their fears in the quiet darkness of their homes. Some found terror, others found comfort, but all discovered that on a rainy night, when the world outside disappears and the shadows grow long, anything can happen. And sometimes, the scariest stories are the ones we tell ourselves. As the rain began to fall, it painted the world outside in streaks of silver, each droplet tapping a steady rhythm against the window panes. The night was thick with shadows, the kind that seemed to stretch and move on their own, and the wind carried with it a chill that crept beneath doors and through the smallest cracks. On nights like these, when the world outside is shrouded in darkness, and the rain muffles every familiar sound, the mind can play tricks, and the ordinary can become extraordinary and terrifying. Our first story takes us to a small, unassuming house at the edge of a quiet suburb. Emma, a college student, had just returned home after a long day. Her parents were away for the weekend, and she relished the rare solitude. She made herself a cup of tea, curled up on the couch, and settled in to watch her favorite show. The rain outside was soothing, its steady patter a comforting backdrop. But as the hours ticked by, Emma noticed something strange. Every so often, the lights would flicker, just for a moment, before returning to normal. At first, she shrugged it off. Old wiring, she thought. But then she heard it. A faint tapping, not from the rain, but from somewhere inside the house. Emma muted the television and listened. The tapping continued, irregular and soft, like fingernails against wood. She stood, her heart pounding, and followed the sound down to the hallway. It grew louder as she approached her bedroom. There, on the window, she saw the outline of a hand pressed against the glass. Her breath caught in her throat. She backed away slowly, her mind racing. Was it a trick of the light? Or had someone been watching her all along? She grabbed her phone and dialed her neighbor, who rushed over moments later. Together, they searched the yard, but found nothing. No footprints, no sign of anyone. But Emma never forgot the shape of that hand, or the feeling that she was not alone. Our next tale unfolds in a remote cabin, nestled deep within the woods. Mark, a freelance writer, had rented the place for a weekend getaway, hoping the isolation would spark his creativity. The rain that night was relentless, drumming against the tin roof with a force that made it impossible to sleep. Mark sat at his desk, typing away, when he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the porch. He froze, every muscle tense. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and he hadn't seen another soul since he arrived. The footsteps stopped, and there was a silence so complete it was deafening. Mark waited, straining to hear anything, a voice, a knock, even the creak of a floorboard. Instead, he heard a soft, wet thud against the door, as if someone, or something, was pressing their face to the wood. He mustered his courage, grabbed a flashlight, and opened the door. There was nothing there, only muddy footprints leading away into the darkness. Mark locked every door and window, but the sense of unease lingered long after the rain had stopped. In another story, a young mother named Sarah found herself alone with her infant daughter during a particularly violent storm. The power flickered and died, plunging the house into darkness. Sarah lit candles and tried to soothe her crying baby, but the wind howled so loudly it drowned out her lullabies. Suddenly, she heard the unmistakable sound of someone whispering her name. The voice was soft, almost gentle, but it chilled her to the bone. She clutched her daughter and listened, her heart racing. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was standing just outside her door. Sarah called her husband, but the call wouldn't connect. She checked every room, but found nothing. Then, in the flickering candlelight, she saw muddy footprints leading from the back door to her daughter's crib. The storm passed and the footprints faded. But Sarah never spent another night alone in that house. Our fourth story is about a teenager named Lucas, who loved exploring abandoned buildings. One rainy night, he dared himself to enter the old Miller house, a crumbling mansion rumored to be haunted. The rain poured through holes in the roof, creating puddles on the warped floorboards. Lucas wandered from room to room, his flashlight casting eerie shadows on the peeling wallpaper. In the grand staircase, he found a series of muddy footprints, fresh, as if someone had just walked through. He followed them to the basement, where he found an old rusted door slightly ajar. Something moved inside, a shadow, quick and silent. Lucas called out, but received no answer. He pushed the door open and found himself face to face with a figure, pale and dripping wet, its eyes wide with terror. Lucas stumbled backward, dropping his flashlight. When he looked again, the figure was gone, leaving only a trail of water leading back up the stairs. He fled the house, vowing never to return. In another chilling account, an elderly man named Harold was home alone during a thunderstorm. He had lived in the same house for over 50 years, and nothing had ever disturbed his peace, until that night. As he read by the fire, he heard the sound of someone walking upstairs. At first, he thought it was just the house settling, but the footsteps grew louder, more deliberate. Harold climbed the stairs, calling out, but there was no response. In the hallway, he found the door to his late wife's room wide open, though he always kept it closed. Inside, the air was icy cold, and the curtains billowed as if caught in a breeze. On the bed, he found a single wet footprint. Harold closed the door and returned downstairs, but the footsteps continued, echoing through the night until the storm finally passed. As the rain continues to fall, remember that sometimes the scariest things are not the thunder or the darkness, but the sense that something, or someone, is watching, waiting, just out of sight. These stories remind us that on a rainy night, when the world is quiet and the shadows are long, we are never truly alone. The next time you find yourself home alone on such a night, listen closely. You might just hear the footsteps, the whispers, or the soft tap of a hand against the window, reminding you that the line between the ordinary and the terrifying is thinner than you think.